And The Guardian in London did a big article about Rowan's 10 best film performances, not TV, film. We came number one, The Schoolmaster, at the top. And the guy was saying, but the real genius of Rowan lies in this combination of wit and performance. And I thought, wow, number one at last, after it only took 45 years. But it was just Chekhov said something interesting. He said, I write one thing, the actor writes another thing, together we make a play. And it's my words that Rowan's saying, but it's his performance. And if it hadn't been for that incredible interpretation that he created the part, then that script would be in the bottom drawer along with a lot of other 45-year-old jokes that would be gathering dust. But because he was, and that was a sketch that John Cleese called him up and said, can you be in my new show and will you do that sketch? And he was a complete unknown. It's before Not the 9 O'Clock News. So we both went to meet John and I watched rehearsal and I'd seen Rowan do it a dozen times in the little revue at Hampstead Theatre the year before, in which I wrote it. And so I knew it worked, but the audience had no idea who he was when he came on. He walked on the stage an unknown and walked up a star. He just held them in his hand. It's absolutely glorious. And then he was followed by Pete Townsend, the Who, coming on with an acoustic guitar to do Pinball Wizard. And he said, follow that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. One thing I love about doing this show is meeting great authors, talking about their journey as an author, and meeting great friends. And, that's what I love about this podcast. And a while back, we had a gentleman on the show, and he's back again. And I'm excited because he's got an update for us as listeners and readers. Another edition out for you to enjoy and to share and love. And I just love connecting and reconnecting with past guests. It's a joy for me. And Richard Sparks is back on the podcast, and he's got some great stories, which I always love. And he joined me from a different location from the last time when we met. And there's a story behind that too. But I'm so happy Richard's here. I'm happy that he's safe with his family and all of his pets. But he's here with us today to talk about his new venture. Richard, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's excellent to have you here. And I know where you are from and where you live in this big world of ours. And you're impacted by what's happening in town in California. So can you give us an update on you and your family? How is everybody through this crazy time?
Yeah, well, we're all fine. We live in Los Angeles. We weren't that close to the fires in Beverly Hills, but close enough. So on Wednesday night, we piled a car with 8 cats and 3 dogs, because our daughter had left her 2 dogs and 4 cats with us while she went snowboarding. And then piled the car, drove through the night and arrived, we're 200 miles north on Morro Bay on the coast at her house with her dogs and our cats. And there was only one minor accident in one of the baskets. And we're safe and we're out of everybody's way down there in the danger zone. It's really scary. Several friends of ours have lost their houses in the Palisades fire. So we're very lucky to have somewhere to get away to. And so far, I'm lucky that our house has not been affected.
Well, it's amazing what can happen in such a short amount of time. And just the stories you see of people on the street coming back to what was their life, their home, everything that they had. People escaping with what's on their back. And it's heart-wrenching to see that. So I'm glad that you guys are safe.
Our friends, Neville and Cindy, lived at the top of the big Palisades, and we had a lovely dinner party there in September, I think, when I was lucky enough to meet James. That's who he played. William Shatner, who played James D. Kirk. Splendid form at 90 Mumble 4 or so. Very alert, very funny. Really nice to meet him. Especially he was in also in Boston Legal, which was so beautifully written by David.
Yeah.
What's his name? Kelly. What a wonderful writer.
Wow.
And that
home. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you guys are safe and everything. We had you back on episode 363. I'm looking at my sheet while I'm here talking, and it was a great conversation. And what I loved about that is you threw out a name in our pre-chat that made me go, wait, what? as somebody that you had written for back in the day, and you have an update for us as well about Rowan Atkinson.
Oh, yeah.
I love listening to any story about that gentleman. I have a deep appreciation for him as a creative comedian and just a special person in this world. And you had written something for him. And I remember you saying you were at a bar or a restaurant and there were people talking about this specific thing that you had written. And they were talking about how much they loved it. And you're just like, oh, yeah, well, I wrote that. They're like, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
Well,
Richard Curtis wrote it. He's a friend of mine. I told that story. So what? So they walked out eventually, and I walked home feeling, what am I, chopped liver? But I told that story to John Lloyd in the same pub last year, I think, because that story was 20 or 30 years ago. And John said, oh, I can do better than that. And John Lloyd produced Not in the 90s Rock News and Blackadder and QI, so obviously he's worked with Rowan over the last 40 years. He said he was off on a first date with a young lady, and they went miles from London just to get away in case anybody knew either of them. And they were in a bar somewhere in the West Country, and a man was showing off to his friends about how he was a great friend of John Lloyd. They were sort of listening there for a bit, and it was going on and on and on. And after it, as he got up to leave, John tapped him on the shoulder and said, excuse me, mate, I'm John Lloyd, and you're talking complete bollocks. The lapse of start party. So that rather topped my story of it. But, every 7 years when he ups the copyright for the Schoolmaster sketch, Martin Lewis, who produced The Secret Policeman's Ball, he also gets a couple of letters from people saying, Richie Curtis wrote this, not Richard Sparks. But it's on the label of the record.
Yeah.
You can see my name. But I mean, being a couple of years older than Richard, I told him that I had seniority on the name and he should change his first name to Tony. So there'd be no confusion between Richards, just him and the other Tony Curtis. But he never got around to it. So so the story was, it was last week was Rowan's night. This week, Rowan was his 70th birthday. And John told me he had a lovely party in London, where I'm not at the moment. And The Guardian in London did a big article about Rowan's 10 best film performances, not TV, film. Weekend number 1, The Schoolmaster, at the top. And the guy was saying, but the real genius of Rowan lies in this combination of wit and performance. And I thought, wow, number 1 at last, after it only took 45 years. But it was just a little, Chekhov said something interesting. He said, I write one thing, the actor writes another thing, together we make a play. And it's my words that Rowan's saying, but it's his performance. And if it hadn't been for that incredible interpretation that he created the part, then that script would be in the bottom drawer along with a lot of other 45-year-old jokes that be gathering dust. But because he was, and that was the sketch that John Cleese called him up and said, can you be in my new show and would you do that sketch? Yeah. And he was complete unknown. It's before Not the 9 O'Clock News.
Yeah.
So we both went to meet John and I watched rehearsal and I'd seen Rowan do it a dozen times in the little revue at Hampstead Theatre the year before, for which I wrote it. And so I knew it worked. But the audience had no idea who he was when he came on. Yeah. He walked on the stage an unknown and walked up a star. He just held them in his hand. It was absolutely glorious. And then he was followed by Pete Townsend of The Who, coming on with an acoustic guitar to do Pinball Wizard. And he said, follow that. So happy day.
Yeah. It's amazing how words written down and a thought and an idea can take on a life of its own and then spark somebody's career and lead to the next thing. And all of that, if you kind of rewound that, and in that moment when you were inspired to write, had you not done that, a whole bunch of things could have maybe not happened the way it did, or life could have been different. I love when an author and a writer says they get that feeling like a tap on the shoulder, that this is the moment to write. This is inspiration. And if you don't respond, it seems to move to somebody else, and it gets to them.
That's why you should always have a notebook by your bed at night, in case you wake up, write it down, because it's gone in the morning. I've been there. You wake up and think, hey, what was it? Oh, no.
Yeah.
So, well, the tap on the shoulder the show was my former student partner, review partner, Peter Wilson, who's my roommate at college.
Yeah.
Much better actor than I was, much better comedian all round. I used to write the stuff, and together, he said, I need a straight man kind of thing. So we had a lot of fun with students. So he was in it, and his then wife, Elspeth, and Rowan. That was the show that Michael Ruppman put together at Hampstead.
Yeah.
And I'd written for Peter before, and for Elspeth, but I'd never written for Rowan because I hardly knew the guy. And he also had a perfectly good writing partner in Richard Curtis, and they brought their own material, and Peter and Ellie brought theirs, and I brought mine. And together we managed to cobble together a show. But that particular morning, I woke up and thought, I've got to write something for the new guy. I can't just write for my friend. So this was the new guy. So I sat down, started writing a list of silly names, and then I realized, well, this is fun. It needs a sketch at the end of it. And so I wrote the sketch, typed it up, and I've still got the manuscript. I gave the typescript to Rowan, so I don't know if he has that. I typed it up, and it started with enter one dressed as a schoolmaster, which isn't on the manuscript, which is in a drawer. And so I typed it up, took it into rehearsal that morning, and just handed it to him in a break. He sort of looked at it, and he was standing here, and I was there, and I gave it to him, and sort of wandered off, So I thought, oh, phew, he didn't say this is not up my street. This is not for me.
Yeah.
Well, okay, well, good. Could have been worse. And I didn't think much more of it until he did it in rehearsal a day or two later. And he had the script on his clipboard because he hadn't learned it yet. And he just filled this empty room with invisible schoolboys. It was extraordinary. I think the only other person in the room was Michael Ruppman, the director. Maybe one or two of the cast, Peter or Ellie, or maybe Richard Curtis. I don't know. I don't know. I just remember Rowan coming on and doing it really slowly and taking time between every beat, and it just built and built and built. And you just go, oh, so that's what this sketch is. It really, it was, so the Chekhov point, I write one thing, the actor writes another thing, and together we make a play.
I love listening to the reaction of the crowd when you see videos on YouTube and stuff of him doing this, because there's almost an anticipation of what's coming next.
Yes. And right? it became his party piece. Yeah. It's like Garth. He had to do it at the end of his one-man show. Well, it's using 1.5-man show. It's mainly him, and he had a stooge, would either be Richard Curtis for a bit or Angus Dayton, I think. Yeah. It's sold-out shows all over London and places. And I think he just got bored of doing it, so I don't know who wrote it, but somebody wrote an obscene version with much more obvious, dirty names, just slightly subtle. And someone said, Rowan's doing your sketch, but he's changed all the words. I went, what? So I had to call his agent up and say, oh, excuse me, that's my copyright. But anyway, they cut me in on half the royalties, which is very generous of them. But I didn't write the second one. Don't blame me for that. If you don't like it. If you think it's better than mine, well, you're wrong.
How dare you? How dare you? Yeah.
It's all good fun. That. Old friends go back forever. Rowan called me up terribly apologetic. He said, I didn't think, I was just having fun. And I just, of course, do it. Go ahead, go for it.
It's amazing. Good. So you had written your first book, your book that we talked about on the show, and now you've written another accompanying one as well. So take us back a little bit to your first time here on the show, catch us up to speed for maybe those who haven't heard that first episode yet, and now we can move into what you've got out in the world now.
Well, it goes back to your being tapped on the shoulder by the idea point. I really got into playing role-playing games. And one of the reasons for that is that when you're in a game, you're the hero. You're not just watching some actor representing the part. You are the hero of your own story. You create the part, you take through it, you create your own avatar. And I played many, many different games, particularly like the sword and sorcery ones. And one day I just thought, one night, I thought, what would it really be like to be this guy, to be in a world like this, not in a game. It's not going into a game. That's been done.
Yeah.
This is, it's Spartash, the narrator hero wins the world championship of sword and sorcery, and the next thing he knows, he's standing alone on the hillside with crappy sword and shield, not knowing what's going on. And he's his own avatar, for real. And there are wolves chasing him. But of course, things get worse. So that was the inspiration for it. I just, if I wanted to know what it would be like, I had to write it. And I've always longed to write fiction, a narrative fiction, as opposed to scripts, which I've done for 40 years. And this was finally the idea that I've been waiting for. And I've always known how to write, but what to write, as any writer will tell you, is it's the material, it's the idea.
Yeah.
What's the point in writing a mediocre book? Just having if you get a really good idea, then you're so lucky.
Yeah.
But what I went with the idea, and a couple of things happened. I wrote 3 books before we went to market in the series, and I think this is important for unpublished writers to realize, is that they don't need you. I remember having a meeting with a friend of mine. Glad he lost his home in Palisades Fire this week. He was a lawyer. He was going for a lunch with some big agents. He said, you should come and meet them. And I said, well, I've got a very good agent at William Morris. I shouldn't go and have lunch with someone else. He said, look, he said, you don't realize they don't need you. It took me a while to realize that they don't need you. You have to make people need you in this business. Yeah. So whether it's seeing an agent or getting a script done, whatever it is. Now, for a writer to be published, you've got to have a product. They don't publish writers. They don't publish books, they publish writers. They publish authors. You've got to make yourself into an author, or if possible, a brand author, they call it. So I said to my agent, well, this is more than one book. By the time she'd read it, a couple of months after I sent it to her, I was well into the sequel. She said, oh, great, 3-book deal. And I said, okay, well, let's not go to market until I've got the 3 books done. And by the time we went to market, actually, I was on the 4th. And then she found Cleese, a very good independent publisher. Thrilled to be with them. But if that helps any writers to know that you've got to offer the publisher something, it's not just one book. One book is not necessarily particularly good for them, but if you can offer a series, like a detective series or a romance series or whatever, or literary series, if you can offer a body of work, then they've got something to build on. So that was that was a lesson that we sort of learned back to front, but it seemed to me to be good I wanted to make sure that the 3 books completed. In fact, the series completes in book 4, and I'm writing the sequels in book 5.
Nice.
So you've got to provide something for a publisher to want to get his or her teeth into.
Yeah. Is there anything specific to writing in 2025 that, as an author, as a writer, you see happening, or a change, or a shift in the journey of an author that's more geared to what's happening in the space
possibly,
right now?
I think people are. I don't know. I wasn't writing fiction then, but back in the 80s and 90s, people talked about the curse of the word processor and the doorstop novel. These massive, great novels that started because people didn't throw stuff away. I think that's gone because most publishers now want books that are shorter. Mine they break the mold a bit. They're about 150,000 words. And they tend to say 120 maximum. But because I had them already, and they all work, and I'm very lucky that her editor is so good. In fact, here's a tip I learned from her. Leslie Robin, she's well known in the fantasy and science fiction community. When I started the relationship working with Kasich said to me, we'll publish you on the condition you have a developmental edit. I said, great. The first thing I said to my agent when she said you like the book is, I can't wait to work with a good editor. Because I've been on both sides of the table as a script editor and as a script writer for 40 years. And I love the process. That's where you get the gold. You've got your story correctly in Word. Once you got your first draft done, that's when it becomes really good fun. And I said to Leslie right at the beginning, it's going to be so nice making the change from show business, which is what I've been doing, writing scripts, to tell business, telling a story. I've always wanted to tell a story. And she said, no, you're quite wrong about that. I said, what? She said, look at this scene. But pointed out a scene in the book. So, right, this is a great scene. Don't tell me about it, show me. I go, I said, bring it to life. You're telling me what happened. Show it to me happening. Great note. Fantastic. That's a black belt level note. And I was just reading in New York recently, and the reader before me was his first book. I think he was self-published. And he was reading the first chapter. And and I just was thinking, I wish Leslie was here to tell him, this is an exposition dump. You're telling us what happened. You're not, and it wasn't a scene where there's stuff going on happening, but there's still too much backstory. She says you have to earn your exposition. Another fantastic insight that might go over your head if you're not interested in being a writer. But all that. And then I was on another editing panel in the audience, not as on the panel, and the editors were all agreeing. One thing they get from new writers is a fantastic world building book with all this fantastic world building, and they always have to go back to the writer and say, "Okay, cut the first 3 chapters. We don't need this. Get on with the story. Do your world building as you go along. We don't need to know any about this. We don't need to know the taverns on the left and the mountains on the right and blah blah. Who the people tell the story." So I thought that was very interesting that they all said the same thing. Anyway, I hope some of those tips from people wiser than myself might help.
So hearing advice like that as a young writer yourself, back in the day when you were starting and developing your craft, how do you think you would respond to what you just said?
Me? I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem being edited. I love it.
Okay.
But I was talking to a producer friend of mine recently about 2 writers. He said one of them just absolutely refused to have any changes to anything, fought tooth and nail. And the other one's great, changed a lot, I go, you're serious? What's wrong with these people? You're there to help. You're the producer. And I just simply don't understand that. This sort of preciousness of it's, oh, look. I mean, there's a line in the Schoolmaster sketch that Rowan put in. I can't remember what it is, or he came up with it in rehearsal. And I just laughed. Oh, it's a brilliant line. Not going to tell you which one because I want people to think I wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
If somebody helps, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. It's still got my name on it as the writer. And yes, but at the beginning, my very first proper script that I got was for Southern Television for James Gatwood, who was later head of Southern Television. And it was a series called The Famous Five, based on Enid Blyton's books in the 70s. And my agent sent me to him and said, James is one of the few few producers who'll give an unknown writer a job. And I had tiny little credits, but nothing network. So I went to meet James. He gave me the book to adapt. He gave me someone else's synopsis, someone else's script, someone else's book of the Enid Blyton series. So I went away, read it, saw the synopsis, saw the script, thought, piece of cake, I can do this. So I wrote the synopsis. He sent it back and said, okay, you've got the job. You have to take £300 less than an established writer, but you've got the job. So I write the script. Fast, I've always been fast. Send it in. Get the call. Great. Come on, Richard. This is excellent. Come on in and meet and say hello. Come in for your notes. I go, oh, he's going to just tell me how wonderful I am. So I go and sit in his office and he chats. He's really nice and great job. Well done. And very quick and blah, blah, blah. And then he turns over the front page of the script. In those days, they had cardboard covers with a little cutout window with the title. Yeah. And it's a sea of bluing. There's circles and arrows and lines and things crossed out and notes up the side. And I feel that I've just been kicked in the guts by a cassowary. I do my best not to show anything. Inside I'm thinking everything from, oh my God, I'm terrible, I fail, I'm useless, to, how dare he mess with my immortal purse? Just no, I kept my mouth shut. Gave me my notes. I went away. I fixed the notes. I sent the second draft in a couple of days later. Come back for the next meeting. There were like 3 notes in the whole script, and he gave me the rest of the series. So,
wow.
You just quickly learn to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
You're all in this together. The producer, the script editor, the actors, the cameraman. You're working together for something. And quite often there are reasons why things have to change. Suddenly there's no snow in Latvia, so they have to go and shoot in Hawaii or something. I'm just making that up off my head.
Yeah.
But you have to adapt. And yes, it's very important if you're going to do script plays, anything like that, but you're part of a team. One of the nice things about coming finally to writing fantasy fiction is that it's just me and the reader, or me and the listener as I do the audiobooks. Whereas theatre is an actor's medium, film is a director's medium, and opera, I've written several operas, translated, adapted old ones as well as the originals. That's a musician's medium. Books is just me and the reader, and I love that. But if you're going to be part of the team, and you learn so much from script writing. One of the things I say on panels to people is, when they say, how do I start? I say, take any job you can get. Go to film schools, meet people in film school, make short films with them. Everybody's got a phone. Because you learn so much about story structure. And story structure is the heart of narrative writing. And if you can't do story structure, I don't care how literary you are or whatever, you don't have my respect as a writer. I've seen literary books, I've read them, that are just all over the place. They may be very well written, but they're missing the trick of writing the stories that you want to follow. Page turning is, for me, is Philip Pullman said. Philip, young adult writer, I suppose he'd be. Said, I don't know how to make you laugh, but I do know how to make you turn a page. Yes, he does.
That's good.
I know how to make you laugh as well, but that's...
We talk on the show a lot to the authors and writers about how they can develop their craft and improve and connect and share their story. But I also have readers who listen to this show who may not be an author or a writer, that might not be in their future currently. Is there any words of wisdom on us as readers on how we can actually be a better reader, like to pull out and enjoy the story more than to be... the idea for this show is I want people to connect with you as an author so they get more out of your book when they read your words, because they have a built-in relationship with you. That's the idea behind this podcast.
Yeah,
but
that's a great
do you have
question.
how do you be a better reader?
I think there are actually two opposing answers to this.
Okay.
One is that I believe it's my job as the author to do all the work. This is, for example, why I don't particularly like modern poetry. I love modern art, but modern poetry annoys me because I have to do all the work to struggle through the word salad that this person's put down. This is impressionistic stuff, and I've got to make sense of it somehow. Whereas I don't feel that about modern art. I'm not a traditionalist. I do like form. I like lyrics. But I think it's my job as the reader, to do the work for you. Your job is to sit down and get value for your $20, what do you pay for a book these days? Or $2 if it's an audio book. Kindle, whatever, e-book.
Yeah.
But your job is to sit by the fire and pull your dog's ears and just turn the page and have a great time. The other thing is that there is a great skill to deep reading. And if you learn, literary criticism at all at university, I was lucky enough to study English language and literature. And you work with great professors. You find great depth in books that you at first don't necessarily see. So that's a skill that you can develop. But for me, the first thing is just go with the flow, enjoy the ride. And if a book is, if it doesn't grab you, I think the author's missing basically the heart of the job. I mean, Dickens makes you turn pages. I picked up Bleak House a couple of years ago because I just wanted to read that first chapter about the fog in London, the fog rubbing its back on the window pane. Where did that phrase? I'd finished the book before I realised it. It's just easy.
Yeah.
When I get a book that takes me with it, I'm just so grateful. And when I get a book that doesn't live up to expectations, I drop it.
Yeah.
To the hype. And there are problems with all genres. I was going to say fantasy, but fantasy, romance, literary fiction. Some of them are just plain not very well written. And the ones that are well written, whatever genre they're in, I'll go for them. I'm just so grateful. I mean, romance, the best book ever written is Pride and Prejudice. We all know that. It's a page that it's beautiful construction and is just perfect.
So take us through the pages of this next book in your series. Like what can a reader expect? What do we need to know? How set this up for us as we get this next in the series?
As you know, the hero, and eventually he finds his two companions in that new world. It'd be very surprising if he didn't. But he starts off by himself in a world like the ones in his games, but for real. By the end of it, it's explained what's happening and why, and then there are more problems for his companions too. But there will be more challenges coming down the pike. So New Rock, New Roll, ROLE was the first book, and the second book, New Rock, New Realm. Basically, they go somewhere else and do something else.
Yeah,
we've now set it up so that more adventures can happen, more fun can happen. I think of the 4 books I've written so far, my favorite is book 3, because it's very the story structure in that was a real challenge, and I loved the fight. But there's a lot of fun in there. And I was a bit worried that book 2 didn't have quite that comic element, but a lot of people are coming back and saying how much better it is than book 1. I was so relieved that it was as good as or better than the one. So that's really nice. Because you're always full of doubts. And whenever I listen to the audio book, all I hear is me. You missed a trick there, or you didn't get that right, or whatever. Or, my God, that's a repetition. Call the post-production. Sort it out. So we, as I said, we got the 4 books done, which is more or less the series complete, and now I'm on to the sequels. So this one is, if you enjoyed the first lot of adventures, come and enjoy the second lot.
Excellent. Do you find that the depth of the character changes from book to book? Like, do we go deeper and deeper with our characters compared to your first book in the series?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things I learned from the famous 5 series, which was 4 children and a dog, right, is you can't have them all going around in a clump together.
Right.
Directors and I used to laugh about, 4 children, cut to the dog, woof, 4 children,
Yeah.
So in the second book, our team of 4 heroes, as they are by now, they all go off in different directions. So where the first book is told entirely in the first person by the narrator, in the second book, it starts off being first person, but when I'm going off with character A, B, or C, they're third person. So I'm a bit breaking the rules, but Leslie and I worked it out how that it's okay to be part first person, part third person. It works. But that's a really interesting way of learning more about the other people, as well as just the narrator. So yes, they are fleshing out. And also, as any author will tell you, characters just suggest themselves. They pop up out of nowhere. And then you're stuck with them forever. And then great. Some of the characters from the first book come back in the third book in a big way, which is nice. And so and one of the characters they picked up in the first book is now part of the team with his dog, who they picked up on the way.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how these things suggest themselves.
For you writing in series, knowing you have this plan to write multiple around the story, do you have that big picture the entire time, or does the big picture kind of unfold for you from book to book? For a reader, we don't really understand how this all works. Can you kind of share that?
It's both. The first thing I realized that I needed to do once I had the idea was, how does this land? How do you explain this? How does this end? Not necessarily the plot, but what's the explanation for all this? And I wanted to make sure I've read books that have unsuccessful sequels because the first books land so well. There is no possible sequel. The writer tries to make a sequel, but is really swimming against the tide. So I wanted to make sure that it set up as sequels at the end as well, which it is. So you just follow your nose a lot, but you've also got to be able to pull focus, stand back, look down at the whole forest and see this is what it's all about. So while I'm writing, I'm usually going ahead, sort of seeing where it's taking me each scene. I'm always backing off and assembling my synopsis on the side, so that if let's say I've got 10 chapters of a book done, I might have a document with 2 or 3 line description of what happens in each of those 10 chapters. Some scattered notes about what happened in the next 30. When we get to this point, there's this chapter, and how we get there, I don't know, there's blank bits, and then the ending is this explanation, and it works out with that. And so gradually fill in the story kind of while you're going along. That's the way I do it. I know some people plot it all out in advance. A great example of that is the master himself, P.G. Wodehouse. I listened to one of his books the other day, and it was 100 years old that year. And he had an introduction in which he talked about getting either a secretary, but then he thought, well, they'd all think I was completely mad. So he got a dictaphone, and he started dictating into it, and he sounded like a complete idiot. But in it, he says, I love writing my books, but I don't like planning them. And what happens is I plot them, and I end up with about 450 pages of notes. And I went, what? What? I mean, for the great comic master of the 20th century, 450 pages of notes for those little exquisitely plotted comedies about earls and butlers. That shows you what the great writers do to get it right. And he used to rewrite every book. He'd write it and rewrite. And he's, as I said, he's the master of the 20th century comic writing. Other writers have come and gone. He stood the test of time.
Wow.
150 pages. The amount of, I quite often liken it to an iceberg. 90% of the writer's work you don't see. The thing you read at the top, water. That's the easy bit. You get on that, you run around, you shoot a scene, you go home. That's your job as a reader. But the writer, you've got to do the I suppose you could call it below story. Yeah.
Below the water mark, below the water level. It's that unseen part.
And then if you're starting out, just take advice from everywhere. There are plenty of courses now you can do, but didn't exist when I was starting. And then any time you get a job, just rescue the people. Don't think you know everything. Here's one. I did a terrible show in London. It was a musical, dreadful idea, but they paid me to come in and help fix the script. And we had a very great Broadway director, Albert Marr. And Albie created Kismet, Man of La Mancha, top-class director. Also directed a lot of Shaw. And we didn't have a lyricist. I was there to fix the book. We didn't even have a composer. We ended up using historical songs from the period. So I said, well, I can write lyrics. I've written a lot. And like this whole, New York Lizard looked at me and thought, oh, God, another kid who thinks he can write. I said, okay, well, fine. So I went to where, luckily the first one I wrote he liked. It's a comic one. And I think the third one I took to him, I was quite proud of it. I thought, this is rather a good lyric. So I took it in. I met him at the end of the day, at the end of rehearsals. Because he'd be, it started in January, it's opening in March. It's that kind of time, crazy. And at the end of the day, I'd meet him and he'd mix a ferocious martini. He'd read whatever I got for him, possibly next day's lines for the actors or lyrics. And he looked at this lyric, which I handed him, feeling of quiet smugness. And it didn't move. He seemed to look like it. Oh, this is fine, but it's for entirely the wrong show. Black belt, no. And, you just go, okay, yeah, well, he knows what he's talking about. Another black belt note he gave me was, he said, Richard, you write very good lyrics, but you don't think like a lyricist. Well, that got my ears pricked up. Oh, okay. So I said, Albie, how does a lyricist think? And he said, here's the black belt note. A lyricist will take 6 pages of your book and turn it into 20 lines of the lyric. In other words, that song will move the story 6 pages, which is why Gilbert and Sullivan are terrible dramatists, because they don't move the story in their song. They write brilliant vaudeville I am songs, but people coming on stage and singing about who they are is not moving the story. The Major General song is one of the great comic songs ever, but nothing has it, except the guy sings about himself. So they're very stop-start, those shows. You don't write I am songs. You write I want songs. I'm going to do songs.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
It's just, I went home thinking, God, I would never have learned that at any writing course.
No.
It's only by working with these great people that you get these notes, and you've got to be open to listen to them. And
be receptive and not have an ego and not, like you mentioned, I walk into the room like, I don't like editing. I don't like people who edit my words. My words stand the test of time.
Which
right?
we all have, but you just got to learn. Absolutely. You've got to get out of your own way. We're all convinced that what we've written is good, and then you need to, once you get the step beyond that, you go, oh, phew, thank God I got that monkey off my back. Now we can do some real work. Because we're all trying to help.
Yeah.
And, okay, well, we can go on to the subject of bad notes now. I have this totally false belief that there's no such thing as a bad note. And why I have this belief is because if you get a note that is obviously completely wrong, you have to tell yourself, I didn't explain it properly in the script. So you need to go away and explain what you were doing, rewrite it in a way that the idiot who gave you that terrible note will understand. And you say, thank you for the great note, but I fixed it. Usually that gets through. And they go, oh, yeah, of course, it's much better now. So try and get out of the idea of, I've got to fight this now, I've got to try and persuade them that they're wrong. No, persuade them that they're right, but make it so that you're both right. So it's a win-win. And there are, of course, bad notes. There's a famous story in Hollywood of, remember the show My Favorite Marcie?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, there was a great note came down from the studio executives to the writers one day, circle around it, and a note saying, a Martian wouldn't say that.
Based on what knowledge you have? Yeah.
But, you just got to work with stuff. I can imagine the faces of the writers from going, I think someone wrote a book with that title and exploited it. It's not necessarily a straight line, any of this.
Yeah.
I mean, looking backwards, I don't know how I got. I suppose it's like it was the Irish joke. If I wanted to get to Tipperary, I wouldn't start from here. And I think that's everyone's writing career.
Yeah.
It's the same for all of us, but everyone's path is different.
So what is the timeline then, now that you've written all of these in series? How are you launching these, these multiple books? They
come out once a year. The next one will come out at the World Fantasy Convention in Brighton, England, in Halloween, probably Halloween or the day after. 2025. That's New Rock, New Rules. So New Rock, New Roads. Number 4 will be 2026. And if I manage to finish number 5, that will come out in 2027. I hope I do, because I like writing them. And there's, it's nice to have an idea that you want to do.
What is it? Give me a moment in the writing process where you push away from the desk and you're like, I'm really happy with where this is going. I really feel content. I feel like I'm really into the story and I know I'm on the right path. What does that feel like in that moment to kind of push away from the desk and go, yeah, this is really working?
I know that. I know I haven't had it recently on book 4. I'm struggling with 4 at the moment. But there was a moment in book 1 where our hero's been captured. This isn't much of a spoiler alert. He's been marched off by these 2 little woodskin. Basically, you'd think they were elves, but you don't call anyone an elf in that world because it's a terrible insult.
Yeah.
The elves in that world would eat you alive. Anyway, so these little guys were taking him off to be basically sold into the army, and a creature comes over the hill towards them and steps toward. There was this description of this Ifrit, I called it, good creature with a long beak and flapping feet, stalking like a big wader. And they watch it go rather nervously. And our hero sees these white chips in its eyes, this white eyes that are threatening. And when that walked past, I thought, hey, we're onto something here. We really are. This was about 50, 80 pages in the manuscript. I thought, there's a world coming here. This is something. And another moment would be in book 3, where a scene occurred to me, whereas that scene's going to be so good. I just can't wait to write it. So it's going to come several chapters later. So I just sat down and wrote it. It was just such a fun scene. Even though it wasn't the next thing I should have been writing, I just wrote it. And then when I got there, I was like, shit, rewrite it. But those are the moments that you really treasure. And when characters appear that work, you go, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. You can't quantify it. You can't bottle it. I don't know where the next one's coming from.
Yeah.
But it's
like a confirmation that you're on the right path.
Yeah, you just go, that works. And I think having had a lot of experience working as a script editor, when you're reading things back, you have a sort of editing hat on as well. So you're not just getting high on your own supply. You're seeing it as a reader, as an editor. Because I never send anything to Leslie before I'm happy with it. She's working on the developmental edit of book 3 at the moment, which I'll be getting her notes on soon. And I can't wait.
Starting it, yeah.
And the story structure in book 3 is really tight. That is, that, as I said, it took a lot of doing. And there's a character, don't want to give spoiler alerts, but every month I'd go outside and stand in the garden and look at the full moon and say, where's the answer? You're back. It's another. I know that, and we got there, and then you look back and you go, oh, of course, yeah, that's easy, but you never know what you're going to write.
And that's why I love talking to you, Richard, because it's interesting from a reader's perspective to listen to an author unpack for us the journey of writing, how the story has grown, how it's gotten deeper, the moments that light you up as an author that we can anticipate as a reader. When we get to those parts of those stories, to hear how excited you are to write it, for us now to experience it as a reader, I think we get more out of the story than to see a book on a shelf from an author we may or may not know, and we take a chance on the story, right?
That's why you have to make them need you. Like, that's back what we talked at the beginning. That they don't need you. You also provide something that the fans like. It's got to work. Everyone. It's. Well, there was a point in there you made that. I was going to answer. I've interrupted myself. Look,
I'm trying to remember too. I just love listening to this. This is great.
But I could remember because it's something that it might have been helpful. Well, look, we've already done that. You never know where it's coming from, but it comes. Yeah. Also, when the times are bad, you've got to. But I know what it was. Yes, J.R.R. Tolkien. A letter was recently discovered from him to 2 schoolgirls and teenagers who've written to him and said, when's the next book coming? We love The Hobbit. And the letter says, well, I'm writing it at the moment. All I can say is it's about Bilbo's nephew, Frodo, and Bilbo's ring. I haven't been able to do any work on it at all this year because it was in the middle of the war against writing. Things have been rather difficult, as you know, but I hope to get back to it soon. So if, the great ones like him have a year where things aren't happening, it may have been, or it may have been because he was just gestating. I've been a bit stuck on book 5. I'm quite impatient by nature, and I'd love to get on with it. But this one is throwing curveballs at me, and I've just got to work my way through. But when you see Tolkien having a year off, you go, it happens. It happens to the best ones. So don't panic if it happens to you. There's no guarantee that today's work will flow as well as yesterday's did, and tomorrow's might not flow at all. Sometimes you just got to back off. There's Bertrand Russell. I love this one, a great philosopher, was also a mathematician, and he was asked about how he prepares his mathematical theses, or whatever they're called, theorems. And he says, well, when he's given the problem, he studies it hard for 48 hours, as hard as he can. And then he puts it away, and the lecture's coming up in 6 months. About a week before the lecture, the answer pops out of nowhere, and then he has a solution. He says, and this is the line that I love, he says, "It is as if orders have been given for the work to proceed underground." And I think there's a lot of that for us writers, fiction writers, because the work is proceeding. And that's when you wake up in the middle of the night, oh yeah, that.
That's it.
Or when you go for a walk, you stop writing, you take the dog for a walk, and halfway through the walk, oh yeah, right down the road. Because you're not looking at it, you're not banging your head against it.
Right.
And of course you can't make that happen. So you've got to have this curious mixture of patience and stubbornness, and you've got to drive yourself and say, am I being lazy because this isn't happening? Or is it just not happening because it's not laziness, you're just looking in the wrong direction? Quite often with the answer's not where you're staring, it's 30 pages earlier or 40 pages in the future.
So instead of worrying about making it happen, make opportunities for it to happen.
And letting it happen. That's very good. I love that. Making it happen and letting that. That's Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Really good.
I love it. So, Richard, for us as readers and fellow authors to stay in touch with you and follow your journey as a writer and stay up to date on all the series and everything it releases, where do you want to send the listeners to the podcast?
If you go to my website, richardsparks.com, you can get a free audio sample, a free e-sample of the first book and of the second book. And the chapters that I left up there, that I put up there, me reading it, they're both chapters with some comedic elements, which is nice. Those are the ones I read at book events and usually get the audience laughing. And the other chapters are different chapters, so you get a taste of what's going on. And if you like it, come on in and join the adventures. But richardsparks.com, get the freebies.
There you go. I'm looking forward to you being back at home, back with your beautiful bookcase behind you, and back to familiar settings. And I'm glad that your home is safe. And our thoughts to you, your family, and friends that have been impacted by what's been happening. And I'm sure there's ways that we as listeners can help support to some degree. So be aware of that, everyone listening, and do what you can to help our good friends in California. But Richard, thank you so much for making time to do this and to come back and give us an update. I'd love to have you back again and continue the conversation.
Come back after Halloween to talk about book 3.
I love it.
But also, there's a selection of reviews up on my website, including the science fiction fantasy critic who called my work fantasy.
Fun to see. I love that word.
You thought because I was a comedy writer, that my work would be kind of mockery, taking the mickey out of the genre. But I love the genre. Why would they do that?
Yeah.
But he coined the term fantasy. I'll use that.
I like that. That's good. Richard, again, thank you so much for making time for you on the show. I'm glad to reconnect. It's always fascinating to talk to you. I feel inspired, and I'm glad to keep this connection going. This is awesome.
Thanks very much for having me.
Excellent, everyone. All the information for Richard in the podcast show notes, as always. All the links we talk about, and all the great things that Richard is up to. If you want a very captivating person for your podcast, if you have an author podcast, then reach out to Richard. I know he'd love to talk about the writing process and what he's working on. So, and as well, for the readers listening, this is a great series to get involved in and to put your heart into, because you'll be rewarded in the process by reading anything from Richard. So, Richard, again, thank you so much for this. Appreciate it.
Right. Well, it's been lovely. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun, well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.